The ancient myth of Narcissus describes a young man obsessed with his own reflection. Popular culture has watered that idea down to simple vanity. In clinical reality, narcissistic personality disorder is a severe, rigid, and highly destructive psychological profile. For most of human history, absolute monarchs ruled with unchecked authority. In those environments, a ruler could govern through pure brute force, passing off severe personal pathology as necessary statecraft. Roman emperors like Caligula and Nero serve as early archetypes. They demanded self-deification, displayed a profound lack of empathy, and forced absolute submission. Historical records framed their erratic, violent reigns as the ultimate exercise of imperial power. Psychoanalytic reviews of Alexander the Great suggest his relentless military campaigns across the ancient world were driven by an unresolved need for greatness and the myth of the divine hero, rather than a strategy to advance his civilization. When we look back at these figures, we have to ask a difficult question. We might be guilty of romanticizing clinical pathology, mistaking a deep psychological deficit for visionary brilliance. To understand this deficit, we have to look at the brain. Narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by an exaggerated sense of self-importance and an insatiable need for admiration. At its core, the disorder is defined by a complete structural inability to experience empathy. This 3D model highlights an anomaly in pathological narcissists. Brain imaging shows significant reductions in gray matter within the left anterior insular cortex. Because this region is responsible for cognitive empathy and emotional regulation, the brain is unable to process the feelings of others. Because they cannot regulate their own self-worth, the individual is forced to extract constant external validation from the people around them. Psychologists call this narcissistic supply, and it acts as the only stabilizer for a deeply fragmented internal architecture. Ancient empires rose on the backs of leaders who spent lifetimes extracting global supply to stabilize their own fractured internal architecture. As absolute monarchies gave way to modern geopolitics, tyrants could no longer demand worship by decree. Pathological leaders had to adapt, relying on high cognitive intelligence and manipulation to secure power. This is the high-intelligence grandiose narcissist. Instead of physical intimidation, they secure supply through sophisticated self-promotion and intense charm, and a flawless public facade. They learn to mimic empathy while carefully undermining anyone who threatens their status. Napoleon Bonaparte elevated his title beyond king, crowning himself emperor. Modern reviews of his private writings reveal extreme grandiosity and total apathy regarding the human cost of his wars. These traits were all carefully disguised as patriotic destiny. Democratic systems are not immune to this trait. A comprehensive psychological evaluation of historical records found that U.S. presidents like Lyndon B. Johnson ranked the highest for grandiose entitlement and aggressive attention-seeking. Modern political structures do not filter out pathological minds. They actively select for individuals who can seamlessly disguise their grandiosity as supreme leadership capability. Once in power, these leaders weaponize a dynamic called collective narcissism. By inflating the greatness of the national group, the leader manipulates a frustrated population into making destructive sacrifices for the tribe. To maintain control, high IQ narcissists rely on a tactic called DARVO. When confronted, they deny the event, attack the critic, and reverse the roles to play the victim. This sequence extracts deep sympathy while launching an aggressive smear campaign against reality itself. This creates what psychologists call flying monkeys, entire political factions or nations manipulated into acting as unthinking proxy abusers. They insulate the leader and attack anyone who questions the manufactured narrative. When a leader dictates the truth through these cycles of denial and attack, societal stability is held together by a systemic trauma bond rather than actual growth. Today, the primary battleground for narcissistic supply has moved. You will find it in the corporate boardroom and on the cultural canvas. Leadership scholars often discuss the predictive narcissist. These are leaders who possess an absolute, uncompromising rejection of the status quo. Because they ignore detractors and lack empathy, they can push through massive technological barriers that a normative person would abandon. Henry Ford is a classic archetype here. He operated with an obsessive, isolated mind, demanding total control. That exact self-centeredness drove the vision that revolutionized modern industry, in the tech entitlement and explosive tempers. Yet business cultures excuse these behaviors as the necessary cost of unique brilliance. Artists operate with a similar license. Cultural icons like Salvador Dali and Pablo Picasso openly embraced their extreme grandiosity, using it to conquer their fears, dominate their peers, and build immortal legacies. Society actively enables this behavior. We rename arrogance as confidence, and we rebrand an empathy deficit as disruption or genius. The myth of the solo visionary rarely holds up to scrutiny. These individuals routinely take credit for the creative labor of their subordinates, institutionalizing a culture of cruelty to maintain their status. Their interactions follow a rigid, parasitical loop shown in this graphic, the Narcissistic Abuse Cycle. It moves predictably through idealization, devaluation, discard, and hoovering. We see the idealization and devaluation phases clearly in Picasso's documented history. He maintained a destructive pattern of placing women on pedestals, only to ruthlessly tear them down, extracting their emotional essence to fuel his creative output. In the corporate world, the discard phase is standard operating procedure. Employees are viewed as disposable utilities. Once a worker's psychological supply is depleted, they are cruelly severed from the institution. The innovation driven by these minds relies on cyclical human exploitation. It prioritizes short-term milestones and immense personal wealth over the lasting destruction of employee morale and institutional survival.